I do not support corruption.
Loyal viewers and subscribers, forward to the AVI-NUE. Today we will be looking at markgolding explaining to Ralston Hyman and his talk show about how he will fund his budget presentation that he presented the other day if he should farm the next government some people. In this one, you can leave your thoughts and views in the comment section and let us have that discussion, my people. And if you are new here, forward to the AVI-NUE and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. So let's get into it and hear the discussion out to the end, my people, and see what we can choose from it and hear from it and analyze from it. Let's get into it.
The following is a release from the People's National Party Media Unit.
Welcome.
Good morning, Dr. Sutherland.
Yes, sir. Welcome. How are you?
I'm not bad, thank you. And you?
I'm good, thanks.
Morning, General. How you doing?
Morning, Ralston. I'm well, man.
Okay, so now, Mr. Golding, you know, many persons listen to your presentation and we are glad for the socio-economic initiatives, but of course, people are seeking some clarity about how these will be funded without breaching the fiscal rule.
Right. Well, the fiscal rules are embedded in our law. We did that when we were last in government, and they have adherence to them has achieved a tremendous national benefit, which is the reduction of the debt to GDP ratio, the size of the country's debt relative to the size of our economy, measured by our annual output, which has more or less been cut in half in the period since 2013. And we are committed to ensuring that that is preserved and that we adhere to the fiscal rules. So all our plans have to conform to that.
Okay.
Now, we are in opposition, and the role of the opposition is to develop our policy ideas.
Before you go there, by way of a teaching moment, tell our listeners, why is this 60% debt to GDP important, and which one of the fastest economies in the world have a debt to GDP of 60%?
Well, the established thinking was that 60% represents a sustainable debt level for a developing country such as ours. And
who established that thinking?
That was established, I believe, by the international financial institutions, you know. And you will recall that we were in an IMF program, and that was the debt to GDP ratio which it was agreed was appropriate for Jamaica to aim for. And we are well on our way to getting there, because I think we're at about 69% now.
68.
Coming from over 140%.
Yeah, they said 135, but it was 147.
Yeah, I think different rating agencies have a different method of measuring it. So I think they may have been quoting a percentage from one source, but the generally quoted reference is, I think, 147.
Yeah, 147.
Yeah. So this is in a country which is prone to external shocks, and where we have an imbalanced economy, which is running trade deficits and that kind of thing. We don't want to have unnecessary buildup of debt to fund recurrent expenses that are not generating revenue.
We know, but we just wanted to explain to the people by the process of education.
Yes, and I was just adding a little more to that explanation, because, for example, in the UK, the current government there, they have relaxed their fiscal rules a bit. So
they're at 100%.
Yes. But because their economy is lagging, they see a need to invest in capital projects, infrastructure and other important investments that can create growth.
Germany just passed 500 billion yesterday too, as one of the most fiscally prudent countries in Europe.
That's right. Germany has also done that, really in reaction to the geopolitical situation, but also because their economy has been lagging
for 3 years.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, the thinking on these matters is not fixed. It evolves over time, But we believe that where Jamaica is now, we don't see a need to really grow our debt to GDP ratio. So the question was, how will we pay for our proposals? And the point I am making is that we are not, when we make these proposals, we're not constructing this year's budget. This year's budget has been constructed by the government. They have made their decisions, and those decisions include about $360 billion of discretionary expenditure program. In other words, expenditure other than salaries for public sector workers and interest on the debt.
Right. And for those who believe you are making it up, it is in the fiscal policy paper, which is one of the most important documents tabled by the Minister of Finance.
That's right. Under the fiscal rules and the fiscal responsibility framework that we pass, there's a requirement for the budget, when it's tabled, to be accompanied by a fiscal policy paper, which sets out the government's commitments and an overall, overview of the economy and the assumptions that give rise to those commitments. It's a very important document, and there's one in September as well, an interim one, so it's twice a year. So in the fiscal policy paper that was tabled.
But don't you believe that all the analysts they are called who comment on the budget should read these papers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think anybody who's interested in public affairs in Jamaica should read the fiscal policy paper because there's a lot of information in there, and it will help to increase people's understanding of the way the economy works. And in fact, I think students should read it too. It's students of economics at university and students who are doing any kind of finance-related courses, even at high school.
Yes.
Because it is a document which has, as I said, a lot to teach us. So we are not constructing this year's budget with our proposals. We are assuming we're inheriting a budget. So, for example, the National Housing Trust extraction of resources. That money for this current fiscal year has already been taken by the government, and they're projecting to take it again in the coming fiscal year, the 11.4 billion. That's in their budget already. So when the election is held, which will be some point during the coming fiscal year, that is already a done deal. But the important point to note is that the legislation that they passed, which had extended the period of taking this amount each year out of the National Housing Trust, $11.4 billion a year, that the last year that legislation allows the money to be taken is the coming fiscal year ending March 2026. So whichever government is in power, that money has to stop being taken unless they propose to amend the act again to continue taking it, which I think that's unlikely because from what I understand, even within the NHT now, there are strong concerns being voiced as to the impact of this annual extraction of their capital. So I don't think that is going to be. So either government is going to have to deal with it. But the reality of it, of course, Ralston, is that and this is a little bit technical, but I will try, and you can also help to explain this to our listeners. As GDP grows, and we're talking in particular about nominal GDP, because there's a difference between nominal and real GDP.
Don't you think analysts should know that too?
Yes. So nominal GDP is really the aggregate, the totality of the value in money terms of output for the year, goods and services. And then real GDP is measuring, how much is that when you adjust it for inflation,
consumer inflation.
What is the real value of that growth? And so most of the time people are focused on real GDP growth when they want to see how the economy is performing. But when you're talking about things like tax revenues, nominal GDP growth is very relevant.
As well as the debt to GDP ratio.
As well as the debt to GDP ratio. And in the scheme of things, if you look at the fiscal policy paper, there is an anticipated, I think, $240 billion
taxes
in additional tax revenue projected over the next 4 years.
Yeah, man.
When we cost our proposals annually, we're, somewhere around 10% of that.
Nowhere near that.
Yeah, nowhere near that annually. So, we are not anticipating a problem in funding our proposals. Plus, the $360 billion that is in the budget for discretionary spending and programs represents this government's priorities, what they believe in. People are not electing the PNP government under my leadership to implement the Labour Party's policies.
Right.
They are going to elect us to implement our policies, which we are outlining steadily, starting with this budget debate. So we will look closely at that $360 billion, and we will decide whether we want to keep or not, or reduce particular programs that are in there, and create the fiscal room for the programs that we believe are more important. That is what the government does.
Precisely.
So, we are not anticipating A, having to raise taxes, or B, having to exceed the permitted amount of financing available within the fiscal rules.
Precisely.
So, these so-called analysts who are asking us to explain how we're going to fund our program just need to look at those two realities.
Yeah, but I'm saying them don't. And there's also another third reality, because under the fiscal policy paper, it also says that any government can run an average fiscal deficit of 1.3% of GDP over the period in order to still hit the 60% during the prescribed time frame.
Well, what I would say in response to that, and as you rightly point out, the fiscal policy paper projects the level of deficit that is expected by this government to be run over the next 4 years.
So you can also change it and reduce it.
And they are projecting, although they are projecting a balanced budget for this fiscal year, they are projecting a deficit for the next 3, I think it is.
Next 3 years, 33.4. Yes, 33.47 billion next year, 35 billion the year after, and $4.18 billion the year after. That's 28.29. Yeah.
So they are projecting that they're going to be engaged in some deficit financing for those years.
Right.
But the point really is, and every government does that around the world. I mean, there's nothing peculiar about that. In fact, they do it in much bigger volumes than we. None of those annual deficits that you just outlined amount to 1% of GDP.
No.
Right? They're all within 1% of GDP.
Correct.
Many governments fund themselves on a sustained basis with deficits which are bigger than 1% of GDP.
Exactly.
The Republic of the United States is 6.6. Let's take a break for the time signal. When we come back, we'll continue.
Business, we continue our conversation with opposition leader Mark Golding, telling us how his various far-reaching socio-economic initiatives will be funded without breaching the 60% debt to GDP ratio fiscal rule. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And what I was saying was that they are projecting running small deficits into the future. But at the same time, they're projecting that the debt to GDP ratio will go down over that period and achieve the 60% target. In fact, I think it's projected to be achieved a year early. Now, so we are not intending to deviate from that path in any way. We don't think we will need to. And I would say that to the extent that when we get in there and we look at the numbers and we really carve and slice and dice each line item in the budget to see how we're going to fund each specific program, to the extent that we have to defer the start of one program or other, or phase it in any way, we will do so, because we are committed to sticking within the fiscal rules. But the overall program can be funded and will be funded. And it reminds me of how this government, when in 2016 in the general election, when they said they were going to implement a threshold increase to $1.5 million from the $600,000 where it had been before, and confused so many people in Jamaica who thought they were all going to get a benefit, even if they were below the threshold and weren't paying income tax. I don't remember these same analysts like those who have been coming out and saying, saying how is that going to be paid for?
Right.
Yes.
And in fact, they lied about how they were going to pay for
Correct.
it because they said it was going to pay for itself through waste being reduced and all that kind of thing. And when in fact, how they paid for it was a huge tax package for 2 successive years.
$32 billion, and when I told them that, them said we must come off for the EPA. And it is the IMF people that said no, him have to stay. Yeah, and the current Minister of Finance was one of the principal architect of that. She and Albin Hill, who at first said $0, then they moved to $4 billion, then $6 billion, then $12 billion, then $16 billion. And
so what they were doing was they were giving a tax break to some people, those who are formally employed and were earning over $600,000 a year, but they were adding taxes to everyone else, including those who are below, who are on the poverty line, who pay GCT, and when they buy goods, they pay the price, which includes customs and other GCT on the wharf and so on. That's what they did. $30 billion, and included in that tax measure was GCT on electricity, which they introduced for the first time, in order to fund that 1.5. So when people are saying, we must be so specific about how we're going to fund our program, I think it's a very hypocritical double standard that they are trying to deploy, because they never did that for the JLP with the shenanigans around that proposal back in 2016.
I agree with you 100%.
Yes.
But I would assure the public that we will stick within the fiscal rules, and that there's $360 billion annually of discretionary expenditure, which represents how the government of the day thinks that those resources should be spent, and we will look at that very carefully and make our choices and ensure that what we're telling the Jamaican people we plan to do, that we will do it. Okay. And we're also going to benefit from what I would call organic growth of tax revenues.
Yeah.
With the growth of GDP year after year of nominal GDP, taxes go up. Taxes are roughly 27%
of GDP on average.
So on average. So if GDP goes up by 100 billion, tax revenues can be expected to go up by roughly 27 billion. Yep. And they are projecting GDP growth, nominal GDP growth of 700 or 800 billion dollars over
from 3.48 to 4.18 total. Additional tax revenues next fiscal year 50 billion, the year after 63.99 billion, the year after 60.75 billion, and the year after 71.4 billion. That's 242 billion.
And no government, these are our policy commitments, but no government expects to be able to roll out everything in 1 year.
Right.
Quite frankly, administratively, it isn't always possible to do that, because a lot of preparatory work has to be done to work out the details, cross the T's and dot the I's. But so, we expect to be able to operate within the fiscal rules and do what we said we plan to do.
Clear. All right.
Okay, so the whole issue now, the debt to GDP ratio, one way we can bring this ratio down is really by being more aggressive about growth. So, so how do, if you are in the government, you are the next government, how you intend to do this? Because we believe that 1% per year for 4 years is really not aggressive enough.
We agree. Unfortunately, Jamaica has been really struggling to get high levels of GDP growth.
That's a 40-year average,
Yeah. I mean, the last time we had growth of, 2 to 3% for a couple of years was actually under the PNP leading up to 2007. The last 3 years, I think it was, prior to the 2007 elections, we had growth of, close to 3% per annum during that period, But since then, we haven't been able to do that. And partly the reason is, of course, because the public debt had to be brought under control, and that involves really, running a very tight ship and using whatever resources are available to bring down that debt. We've got through that, but this government has not been able to translate those benefits into meaningful growth in the economy. The economy is stagnant.
Despite the big talk about 5 in 4 in 2016.
Correct. Despite the 2004 16, 5-4 promise, they never got anywhere near 5.
Right.
Never, and in fact, last year, 2024, there was negative growth, and in the last half of the year, the 2 quarters from September through December and July to September, there was actually 2 successive quarters of negative growth, which is a technical recession.
Yes.
So the Jamaican economy ended 2004 in a recession.
Yes.
And fly high or fly low, that is the reality by the technical definition. No one is glorifying that, but it bothers me that they're trying to obfuscate and pretend it isn't so. Because why don't they just speak the truth when they speak to the people?
Precisely.
So the question you've asked is, how do we propose to grow the economy? Well, one thing we intend to do is really work on the bureaucracy and to bring more efficiencies in how the bureaucracy deals with decisions around investment in particular, so that year after year the capital budget is not being spent. Because they're unable to get through the bureaucratic processes to spend the money. And they're not very good. They're not very agile when it comes to adjusting rules and dealing with legislation. And that is an area where I think we have a lot of value to add, because we have expertise, proven expertise in that area. Secondly, we see that the national productivity and total factor productivity is a problem. Productivity in Jamaica has been declining over many, many years, and we need to change that. So that we're generating less output for the same amount of investment, and we need to fix that. So training is education and training are critical to doing that. And we have, and as I outlined in my budget presentation, we have plans to deal with some of the chronic problems in education, which are really holding us back. The high levels of illiteracy and innumeracy coming out of primary school, resulting in secondary school underperformance. The fact that only, I think it's 17% of each year that leave high school leave with the basics of 5 subjects, including English and math. We have to turn that around, and we believe that involves focusing on early child development and primary schools, fixing the problems there, leveling up the standards, and having a serious remedial program early in the secondary schools to fix the situation for those who were already the victims of the poor primary performance before. And then we also want to introduce vocational training in schools, so that we by the time the students leave, they will have up to level 4 hard qualification when they leave school, so they can go into a well-paying job, because the economy of tomorrow is going to be less about having a degree in a liberal arts type education, and more about having technical skills that can be deployed in a highly advanced economy using the methods of artificial intelligence, the methods of robotics, and the whole way in which businesses plan their processes to be more productive and efficient. We have to prepare our children, our youngsters, for that. And we also plan to deploy heart resources in a more meaningful way, including by working closely with the private sector to encourage training in the private sector. It's already happening to some extent, and we want to expand that by working closely with the private sector, because the benefit of private sector driven training is that they are training people for the actual skills that are needed in the enterprise. And that is so there's tremendous value to doing that. So these are some of the things that we have in mind. On a more macro level, the industries that we're interested in promoting include logistics, because Jamaica is blessed by being located in the Caribbean Sea along the shipping lanes coming through the Panama Canal. We have the 7th largest natural harbor in the world with a well-developed port facility. There are other possible facilities for further development of coastal assets to tie Jamaica into the global supply chain, where ships can come here, they can come here to be for maintenance, they can come here for provisioning, they can bring things that are not fully assembled and have them assembled here by our skilled workers and then re-exported with value being added here. And that is a major industry that, we spent $1 million US when we were in government with the I think it was the IDB or the World Bank to develop a master plan for the logistics industry, and it has not been rolled out, and it represents a big gap, and we're committed to doing that as well, and integrating that with domestic logistics as well, by encouraging the more efficient and more resilient infrastructure, and the integration of our warehousing facilities and our ports and so on, and reducing the cost of energy. Dr. Sutherland, Ralston.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
Energy is over 40 US cents per kilowatt hour, one of the highest rates in this hemisphere.
Yes.
Not the highest, but one of.
Yeah, man.
And you cannot run a competitive economy with such high electricity charges. And we see the need to really push heavily towards the transition to renewables. Renewables are becoming more efficient, less costly. Battery storage the technology around storage is improving year after year. Costs are coming down. So we're getting to the point where we will soon be able to generate large amounts of solar, for example, or other renewable energy, and store it so that the grid can have a more reliable source of electricity from renewables. And this government has only issued one RSP, one request for proposals, in 9 years. All of the big solar projects that exist in Jamaica were initiated under our watch, even if some of them didn't come on stream until after we limited office. But the process to get the investors here, to have the RFPs issued, to evaluate them, etc., that was under our watch. This government dropped the ball on energy, and we're paying the price right now. It's one of the reasons why we have such a stagnant economy now. So when they sing the message about they're some fiscally prudent and building a strong economy, it is not true. It is the fiscal rules that have made them fiscally prudent. It is the fiscal rules that have ensured that Jamaica has got its debt down. It started under the PNP and they continued it. But what they haven't done is transition to a growth-oriented economy for all the talk. And the Prime Minister must be held accountable, because he is the Minister of Economic Growth. He created a ministry under his own leadership to drive economic growth, and it has been an abject failure. And he has put most of the important economic agencies of government under it. The National Housing Trust, the Port Authority, etc., etc., etc. But they're not. Let me tell you, I'll give you an example of why it doesn't work. I'm also an attorney at law, and I was dealing with a matter a year ago where a large concern, a large Jamaican business, had decided to sell some of its real estate, and another large Jamaican business wanted to buy it. One of the properties was a leasehold property from the UDC, and it was that property was used by the foundation, the charitable arm of the selling company, for skills training in the community where they live. The lease was at a low rental rate, but there's a provision in the lease that says you can't assign the lease to a buyer who's buying the property as a tenant. You can't assign it without the landlord's consent. It's a standard provision. The UDC, it has taken over a year to get the consent to that assignment. Even though this is a peppercorn rental, the buying party is a listed company, the selling party is a household name. There are no issues. You know why? The Prime Minister has to sign that consent. Can you imagine the bottleneck that concentrating all of these agencies under him has created, that he has to physically sign? I mean, under my watch, that will not happen. Boards will be expected to operate in a normal way, and things that boards should deal with, they'll be held accountable and asked to deal with. And if they don't do it and they're inefficient, we'll change those boards. But it cannot be. And the more the that you require the Prime Minister to do is also lends itself to inefficiency, which lends itself to corruption.
Yeah, man.
Because people will often get frustrated and want to see if they can oil the wheels in other ways. And that is one of the problems in Jamaica as well. So the system is structured, and this government, the way it's set up, is conducive of inefficiency and it's conducive of low growth and persistent poverty. Yeah, and that is why we need a new government. That is why I'm championing change.
Okay. Thank you, boss.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Same to you. That was Opposition Leader Mark Golding telling us how his various far-reaching socio-economic initiatives will be funded without breaching the 60% debt to GDP ratio fiscal rule.
And based on what the government's own projections with an average annual GDP growth rate, the incremental tax revenues this year, 50 billion. Next year, 63.99 billion. The year after, 60.75 billion. And in 28-29, 71.4 billion. That's total additional tax revenues without raising taxes of 242 billion. And there's their discretionary expenditure, 359.4 billion. And there's a fiscal envelope of 84 billion. So those who are asking the questions as to how these things are going to be financed, they need to read the fiscal policy paper. It's the most important budget document.
From the Avenue, this is all for now, my people. What is your thoughts and view on all of this? Leave it in the comment section below. And if you are new here, welcome forward to the Avenue. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Avenue. I'm out for now. Catch you in the next one.